Welcome, everybody. This is Age to the Church in Need's Break the Silence podcast. My name is Caroline Hull. I'm the National Director of Aid to the Church in Need UK, and I'm here with my colleague Kinga this week. I'll let Kinga introduce herself. Hi, Kinga.
Hello, everybody. My name is Kinga Schierstadt, and I work at the headquarters of ACN International in Königstein, that is near Frankfurt in Germany. And I'm responsible for the African department, but also directly in charge of the projects coming from Nigeria, Sudan, and South Sudan.
Fantastic. And it's wonderful to be able to have a chance to chat and catch up with you about our recent trip to Nigeria. Just very quickly, for anyone who's new to the podcast or new to Aid to the Church in Need, ACN is a Catholic charity and we support the suffering and persecuted church around the world. So we're there whenever the church needs us. We do everything we can to raise awareness and to ask people to pray and also to raise funds to help. All of our projects are run through the church. And Kinga and I are just back from a trip to Nigeria. So we thought we'd make a fantastic podcast if we could just have a bit of a chat about what we saw. This was my very first trip to Africa. I've been to Liberia. It was my first trip to Nigeria. And I was blown away. What a fantastic country. So colorful. Everyone was so polite and welcoming and hospitable and warm. It was a beautiful experience. What about you, Kinga? What did you think?
Yes, for me, it was my fourth trip to Nigeria. And I have to say this country is very close to my heart because my very, very first trip went to Nigeria, to the diocese called Maiduguri, where Boko Haram was created. And I think it was one of the trips that impressed me most in my life because of the people I met there. It was the first time that I was really confronted with people suffering for their faith. And to see this testimony changed my life. So Nigeria is actually very, very close to my heart, yes. So I was very happy to return. And I'm happy to return, hopefully, several times also in the future.
To go back as well. It was just marvelous. And I've done quite a bit of traveling for ACN to other parts of the world. And there's always a little bit of not necessarily danger, but there's, a little bit of anxiety when you go. And Nigeria was a whole different level of that because we really were traveling in areas that are quite dangerous, where there are problems with kidnappings, sometimes in broad daylight. And we were visiting places that had been attacked relatively recently. And we weren't there for long. It was only a week or so. Right. But to be there and to feel that this is how some people need to live all the time, that really touched me and moved me, and to see how deep people's faith was despite all of that. It was wonderful, really wonderful. And you sort of organized the trip, and because you're a hero, you were so grateful. So do you just want to explain quickly where we were and where we plan to go visit?
So we chose three of, maybe I cannot say the most suffering, but three of the dioceses that are suffering a lot or have been suffering a lot in the past. The first one was Kaduna. The challenge or the suffering in Kaduna is mainly a lot of kidnapping of church personnel, but also Christians in general. The second diocese that we visited was Maiduguri. Maiduguri, I briefly mentioned, it was the place where Boko Haram was created. So since 2009, many attacks and persecution of Christians in that diocese. And the third one is Makurdi. Makurdi is located in Benue State. And there the big challenge or the big problem is not so much terroristic attacks from Boko Haram, but rather from the Fulani being a nomadic tribe. And they recently started to attack also mainly the Christian population. And so with that, this diocese is flooded by IDPs.
I found in each of the dioceses we mentioned. And we also drove through, we visited very quickly the Bishop of Kano when we were driving to Maiduguri from Kaduna. And then when we were driving from from Maiduguri to Makurdi, we went to Jos, but on the way we also went to Lafia, just to sort of touch in. And the scenario is so different from each diet. So they're all suffering these problems, but they are for slightly different reasons. And I found it very nuanced. Is that a fair way to describe it?
Absolutely. And very often we speak of Africa as if it was Africa in one country. But then now this trip to Nigeria also showed even Nigeria, that is one country, is so diverse and with so many nuances, as you said, and so many different challenges and problems that you cannot speak of Nigeria as Nigeria and the Nigerian problem because each place we visited was different, no?
Yeah, absolutely. So let's just start from the beginning. And what we haven't mentioned is getting around Nigeria was hilarious. I mean, it's almost as if whatever you plan doesn't quite work out the way you planned it, right? So we did a lot of driving, and I would like to pay tribute to Friday, our fantastic driver who took us all over the Diocese of Maiduguri and then drove us there to Jos. And it was a tearful parting when we said goodbye to Friday. He was amazing, but we had fantastic drivers, sometimes priests, in other dioceses as well. But boy, we spent a lot of hours in the car, but it was so interesting to see how the landscape changed.
Yes, from the dry desert to a more greenish area where agriculturing farming is possible. Very nice to see these differences.
Yeah, and we were there right at the end of the dry season, so they were waiting for the rains to come. And although they were desperate, particularly in the dry areas, when we visited some of the IDP camps and some of the other projects we saw, I just thought, oh my goodness, it's 40 degrees and really hot, but what will they do when the rains come? I just can't even imagine, what it was like. And presumably they suggested we come still in the dry season, because getting around in the rainy season
it's actually impossible. Some of the roads are blocked because these are not tarred roads. I mean, now we took a lot of tarred roads, but when you go into the smaller villages and when you move around into some more rural areas, it's not tarred roads. And so it's actually difficult to.
It's not possible. Yeah, absolutely. We started off in Kaduna, and I wasn't prepared for the very first little day trip that we went on. You probably knew what was coming. I didn't. We went to visit a place called Adamadutsa. It's what would you say? It's probably almost an hour off the nearest paved road. So it is really off the beaten track, as we say. Quite scrubby landscape with kind of big hills or small mountains in the background, but lots of places where you could hide quite easily, little rock formations and shrubs and plants. And we visited this village. We were there towards the end of April, right? And it was end of February, like 6 weeks earlier, it had been attacked. And I don't know much of the details of the attack. I think it was 11 or 12 people were killed.
Yes, 13 people were killed, and they attacked in the early morning around 6:10 when they were just preparing the church to go to mass. The attackers came and they killed 13 people, yes.
There were a number of people injured. Yeah, lots of, and so we drove and drove and drove. And then we got out, right? And we walked, and the people, I tell you, the first thing I noticed from all my travels, I always go for the children. I used to go for the children when I was younger. Now I'm, sort of, I think they like me as like a grandma thing, and they all come and see me. And there were no smiling children. I have never seen that before. I mentioned someone else who was traveling with us. I said, and he said, that's very true. They were shell-shocked, I thought.
Especially in Africa, no? Because in Africa you see despite all this poverty, you see smiling faces and you're used to that. So the shock is even bigger when you see not children smiling. And yes,
Yeah.
I agree. I presume it's because, I mean, it was only, as you said, 6 weeks before, and we were again strangers coming into that region, even though we were accompanied by the bishop, the archbishop. Still, we were there with a lot of soldiers, with a lot of militia. So this
Yeah.
aggressivity, the arms
Yeah.
showed or recalled them what has happened just 6
Yeah.
weeks before.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will never forget standing by that mass grave in that clearing. So Archbishop Matthew walked us to the edge of the village, and there was what was obviously a newly covered up big mass grave. There were a few little, I don't know if they were cardboard or made out of leaves, crosses stuck here and there. And he prayed in Hausa. And I asked him later on WhatsApp, can you tell me exactly what you said? So I can tell. And, he said what I thought, he was praying for the repose of the souls of those who'd been killed, and also for the consolation and strength for those who were left behind. He also told me later that will have been the sort of crown jewel of our visit, because it was that they were so grateful. He said it was, it was a risk. And he was very pleased that we wanted to go and we wanted to see. So I was so moved by that experience. We didn't stay in Kaduna long. And then we hit the road and drove for a really long time. And I remember when we were driving, we were in a hurry because nobody wanted to drive after dark. Do you remember?
Yes, because it's very dangerous. And actually, when I planned the trip, we thought that we're going by plane to Maiduguri, because last time I went there, it was impossible to go by road, too dangerous because of the attacks. And since the plane were full or were not flying, whatever, they suggested that we take the car. But they also said that it had improved a lot since my last visit in Maiduguri, which was 7 years before. And so we did it. We traveled, but by day.
And we noticed a couple of things. Camels, who knew? Or they're dromedaries, aren't they? Arriving around the corner of the sides of the highway. That was amusing. But then also nice. When we were coming in closer to Maiduguri, we noticed for the first time something that we saw repeatedly, which was all the electric, like the telegraph poles broken. So you just go down and they're all just broken. And apparently that's the first thing that happens is if you want to attack a village, you knock out the electricity to make it easier. And some of them had been fixed, but a lot were still broken.
Yeah.
It was great to get to Maiduguri because it was a long day, so we were glad to get there. But here in the UK, we know Bishop Oliver really well. He was here last autumn, and for me, visiting him, staying there and seeing him and praying in the car. Do you remember? We're all the rosary. It says so. For me, it sparked off a whole. I have always loved the rosary, but I'm re-examining how I feel about it now because it's so important to him and his message. And those of us, those people involved with ACN UK will remember that he had a vision while he was praying the rosary, and the Lord Jesus appeared to him with a sword. He was praying at the height of the problems with Boko Haram, and you can read about the story on our website, but Jesus handed a sword to him which became rosary beads, and so he's dedicated to the rosary, and the whole diocese prays it all the time, and we prayed it in the car over and over again when we were driving with him. So it's really, really moving. And Bishop John, the auxiliary bishop there, was also fantastic, and all the priests we met, they were just so welcoming, so friendly.
Absolutely. And I remember when I went there 7 years ago, when they were still in the attacks of Boko Haram, we were welcomed by the Pulka community, which was is a displaced community, and they all took, or many of them took refuge at the St. Patrick's Cathedral in Maiduguri, and this is the place we were also welcomed this time, no? And I remember 7 years ago when we arrived, the Pulka community, they were dancing, there was singing when we arrived, and in all that, the bishop was crying, and I saw his tears running down, and he said to me, "You see, Kinga, all these people, they're dancing for joy and singing for joy because you are coming to visit. ACN is coming to visit. Although all of them are victims of Boko Haram attacks." And that was very, very impressive. And this time we had a similar welcoming, although it was already very late, and although it's really dangerous for them to travel and to go back home when it's dark, they waited until we arrived. And the next day, then we visited the Pulka community. Part of them could go back, no, because the security allowed it, and that was very, very touching also.
And boy, did they dance, and they were so glad to see us. Everybody we met loves you, Kinga. Everybody knows who Kinga is.
It's not me.
Kinga's here.
It's not me. No, but they are. This is something that I really find, on the one hand, very, very beautiful to see this gratefulness. They're so grateful, and of course, I only give my face or my person to that, or my name to that, but in reality it's to all our donors and to all our benefactors, and they really pray for the benefactors, and they told us, and we see it, and when I'm there, they prayed for the benefactors, and that's so nice to see how grateful they are, and the little things that we here from Europe can give, how much they move, and what kind of really miracles they can do. This context in Nigeria, no?
Yeah, no, it was, and the hospitality, you really feel there, and it's they're pushing out the boat, and you want to I want to eat everything that I know they've gone to such trouble. I want to eat it all, but then I think, oh my goodness, should I eat it all, or should I leave some, because they can surely help save it for other people. So it's really, it's just so much hospitality. It's really, really moving. And I think actually that brings us very nicely onto the IDP question, because when we went to Pulka, they're on the outskirts of quite a big, busy town, and they can almost see, some of them, their houses and their businesses and their schools and their church, but it's not safe enough to go into the middle of town. So they're sort of at what was an outstation chapel. And it was quite a neat and tidy camp. There were lots of children there wearing school uniforms, and the welcome was fantastic. And ACN has helped build them a sort of covered chapel area where they can worship. But that's in real contrast, I felt. I mean, it was still an IDP camp, and obviously one's heart goes out to the people who are there, and how frustrating it must be not to be able to get home. But when we traveled again all the way to Makurdi, which is in Benue State, which is mostly Christian, and we went to these IDP camps there, I just thought, oh my goodness, first of all, there are IDP camps everywhere. But the Pulka one they were near home, and it had its frustrations. But the other two we went to, particularly the third one.
I have traveled in Africa, and I've seen IDP camps, but I have to admit that the one we saw in Makurdi really shocked me. Because
you're talking about Ichwa.
Yes, exactly, where they were living in unhuman conditions. You even ask yourself how they fit in these tents, and the tents are just like a mosquito net.
It was like a sort of beehive, wasn't it? And it was probably, what would we say? I would say maybe 3 or 4 feet in diameter, and like a mound made out of some pieces of fabric with a kind of old mosquito net over the top. And I don't even think anyone but a child could lie down.
Yeah,
that's fair to say,
what I
isn't
thought.
It? And they were as far as the eye could see, these. And I just felt like, Pulka had quite even rows of structures where people were staying, and it was still, you wouldn't want to be there. I don't mean to suggest that it was nice in any way, but so we went from there to Ortese, where there were still structures, but it was quite run down. And remember the water? They showed us the water they had to drink, which was terribly discolored. And then when we went to Ichwa, and they're living in these tiny mound things, and so glad to see Father Remy. Remember, they were so excited. That was the only place where I thought they're not as glad to see Kinga as they are to see Father Remy. Everybody just flocked around the priest we were with.
It's
That was
because the
beautiful.
church is present. And I very much like what one of the bishops in Nigeria said, because of all these attacks. And then he was discussing with his priests if they stay in the rural areas where it's dangerous, or if he takes them to the safer city. And then his priests told him, but what kind of image would the Catholic Church give if we all run away? And the people cannot run away. So we stay. And I think this is exactly what the church in Nigeria represents. They stay with the people. Now here in the IDP camps, they come where the people go. No, they are gathered in these camps, and the church moves and tries to bring release.
Yeah, and I think in terms of what we've been able to do, I mean, you can say more about this. As I said, we built this covered chapel to help in Polka. But in Orteze and in Ichwa, in the camps in Makurdi, there we've helped with necessities, haven't we? Blankets,
yes,
sleeping mats,
gave them
things like
exactly that. Mattresses, sleeping mats, blankets, and especially also mosquito nets because of the malaria.
Right. Yeah, and that was the place I was most worried about the rains coming, because there was just no protection, and it was sort of sloping. Do you remember? Yes. You and I went up onto the bit that was all those mound things, and you just thought pouring rain's just going to just wash all of this away.
Absolutely, that's what is going to happen.
And these are agricultural, if I understood it correctly, they're mostly people from agricultural villages, and they've been forced out of their villages by Fulani.
Exactly, by the attacks of the Fulani, which has actually a second aspect. It's not only that now they live in inhuman conditions, but they're no longer able to cultivate their fields, which means there will be no crops, and that leads to hunger.
Yeah. And I think another thing that we're doing sort of alongside this is the wonderful schools that we visited, which was also just brilliant. And I should tell the people listening that one of the people we traveled with was Philip Azores, who's the general secretary of ACN International. And he's very tall, blonde German man with a beard, and they were just fascinated. We went to this boys' school, and they were all staring at it was brilliant to see these children. But one of the things that ACN is doing is helping the bishop fund scholarships for some of these children in IDP camps, so that they have a chance to go to school, which is fantastic.
Even though there are too many, and but his idea was, if I take out 50 every year and I put them into a boarding school, these 50 will be the future of their families. Because unfortunately, in all these IDP camps, the children do not have really schools. So there is no education, and what that means for the future of these people, we all can imagine.
Yeah. Just to sort of wrap up, I would like to say that I was constantly getting told off by the priests at the schools, because I was talking to the children and making videos and things. And I spoke to one girl called Alex at the Mount Carmel College, and she was one of these bishops' scholars. And she said exactly what you've just said. She said, I felt useless. I felt I had no future, and being a bishop scholar has given me my future. He's given me my life back. And she was so eloquent, and sort of, she had this big cheeky grin on her face, and she just said, I just want to tell you guys, thank you to Aid to the Church in Need, because you helped Bishop Wilfred help me get my life back. And that's something I will never forget from a fantastic trip to Nigeria. So thank you so much for inviting me along, Kinga, and thank you for meeting up today to have a chat.
Thank you very much, but also thank you for coming and visiting Nigeria, because these trips are challenging and not always easy. But yes, I think it was a very, very nice trip, wonderful trip, and it gives you a completely different idea of the real needs in a country than when you just read the papers.
Absolutely. So we'll keep in touch with our friends in Nigeria, and we'll keep praying the rosary, and we'll just keep hoping and praying and helping to make Nigeria a better place for a Christian community there.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye bye.